Hello. Thank you for joining. I'm going to give everyone maybe another 60 seconds or so to start trickling in, but it's a pleasure to have you here. Welcome, welcome. All right. Well, thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Kelly LeBlanc. I'm with the Oldways Whole Grains Council. And this January, we're actually celebrating the 20th anniversary of the whole grain stamp. And so we've been doing a lot of like reflecting and looking back at the past 20 years. And now today we're excited to look forward. And we wanted to do something really special for our Whole Grains Council member companies. We are so lucky to have Julie Johnson with HealthFocus International here today to report on some whole grain trends. Feel free, if you have questions throughout this presentation, to type them into the chat, and then perhaps Julie will have time to answer some as she goes along. So with that, we'll turn it over.
Thank you, Kelly. My name is Julie Johnson, as she mentioned. I am president of HealthFocus International. We are a marketing research company that focuses on the consumer perspective when it comes to their nutrition, their health, and their wellness. So we primarily support food, beverage, and ingredient companies, providing a lot of critical insights in what consumers are really looking for beyond just the big broad trends, but really getting into the nitty-gritty of what they choose and what motivates them. So every 2 years, we conduct a major global trend study. We deep dive key wellness trends in order to really get a complete picture of consumers, both on a global and a local level. In our latest trend study, we talked to consumers in 25 markets that are listed here. The study was conducted in 2024 among at least 5,000 respondents in each of these markets. So in this presentation today, to start, I will be comparing how the average global consumer, so all 25 of these markets combined, compares to those in the Americas specifically. So the Americas figure will consist of the US, Canada, Mexico, and Brazil combined. So the second part of the presentation today, I will hone in on those who are specifically prioritizing whole grains in the Americas and what makes them tick. So let's get started. First up, the whole grain situation. We ask consumers how they view their carb intake in general. It doesn't really matter to them. And what we learned is that the largest portion of consumers, that 37% in yellow, are trying to choose the right type of carbs in their diet. So they're avoiding processed carbs and seeking out carbs from whole foods like whole grains, also veggies and legumes. So the second portion, largest portion in red there, may not be quite as discerning about the type of carbs, but they like to include carbs as part of an overall balanced diet. And then we see the smaller portions, just 16% strictly avoid carbs, and even fewer pay no attention to their carb intake at all. So those are groups that you're not going to pay much attention to. They either don't care or don't avoid avoid carbs as much as possible, so they're not going to be your user group. The main point here is that the vast majority, about 70%, think about their carb intake. They're either avoiding bad carbs or trying to offset the bad with the good for an overall balanced diet. The carbs they use really do matter to these consumers. So people want balance. and a good portion are specifically seeking out good carbs and avoiding the bad ones. This holds true when we ask specifically what they prioritize in their diet overall. So here, what's become more important over the last year? And we'll see right around 30% are say that adding whole grains has become more important in their diet over the last year. So, while that may seem low, consumers are not just focused on one thing, and that's the benefit of whole grains. They offer all sorts of other benefits that strike a chord with consumers. So, for most people, diet is about balance and overall broad benefits, and whole grains as a category get some of that attention, but the benefits of whole grains resonate with consumers even more. So, we see adding fiber, natural foods, adding protein, following a clean diet, all examples of how whole grains can really resonate with just a slightly different focus, maybe, than specifically saying adding whole grains. Prioritizing whole grains looks really different around the world. So globally, we saw 30% said adding whole grains have become more important. When we look at it on a market by market basis, we see much different levels of whole grain prioritization. For example, Vietnam and India, if you look over on the right, about half of consumers in those markets are adding more whole grains. Here in the US, it's similar to the global portion at about 29%. And we'll be looking at the whole grain prioritizers in the Americas shortly. So that's those top four on the right: US, Canada, Mexico, and Brazil. And as you'll see, Brazil is really leading the charge in this group, with 43% saying that adding whole grains has become more important to them. So even though just about 1/3 of global consumers say that they're prioritizing whole grains, more are actually actively looking for whole grain claims on labels. So, in fact, 56% of the global population say that whole grain label claims are extremely or very important. Um, Again, pay attention to the other benefits whole grains can offer. These also show up high on the list of claims, like natural and high fiber and high protein, all really important to consumers. So let's focus in on some of the very specific carbohydrate-based label claims. So the whole grain label is actually even more important for consumers in the Americas compared to globally. So we see 58% say that it's extremely or very important. They also place less importance on those low carb, gluten-free, and grain-free claims. So in the US, and the rest of the Americas, that focus is really more on the whole grains and fiber aspect. The takeaway here is that consumers look for positives, way that they can add beneficial elements to their diet, both in whole grains and in fiber. Those are both part of that broad equation. So what about in snacks? Well, as we probably all know, taste wins in snacks. Taste wins in pretty much everything, but it takes the top spot globally for what consumers look for in their snacks, and that's followed by natural and price. So it's not really something that you would be totally surprised by, right? Higher fiber shows up at number 6 in snacks, important to about 58% globally. And it made with whole grains is important to 50% of the global population. So we see two of those things that are directly related to whole grains being important in snack purchases, excuse me. And yes, I believe the slides and the recording will be shared after the presentation to address the question that came through. So when we look a bit closer at snacking preferences, high fiber is a greater focus than whole grains, and both outweigh lower carb in the Americas. So what's important to really note here is that the gap closes in the Americas between high fiber and whole grains. So you look at the numbers in the bars, high fiber ranks number 6 globally, and whole grains ranks number 16. A 10-point gap, as I've labeled there in blue. For the Americas, that gap closes significantly, high fiber ranking number 8 and whole grains ranking number 13, a 5-point gap. So what that means is that while the percentages look similar, the priorities are different. Whole grains is a higher priority in the Americas, specifically when compared to higher fiber. So in the Americas, it gets a bit of a leg up on fiber, while fiber is really the broader beneficial item globally. So let's take a look at some individual grain and carb sources. How do consumers rate specific whole grains against other carbs? For this question, and this gets really detailed, we ask consumers to simply rate each of these as either good, neutral, or bad carbohydrates. And I've bolded the ones that are whole grains or could be whole grains. So overall, you'll see several whole grains rated positively by the majority of the population, both globally and in the Americas. And then there's some notable differences here. Quinoa is rated as good by a far greater portion of the population in the Americas compared to the global consumers. And then you'll also see oats, the top rated whole grain in our list. It's also rated more positively in the Americas, as are ancient grains, up 4 points from the global rating. And then you see some of the things that are rated a little bit lower. Whole wheat flour and millet both fall behind the global population in terms of positivity. And then I have a question here. When it comes to fiber, do consumers discern between natural and functional? Um, yes, I mean, I don't have data to support that, but natural means to a lot of consumers simply a clean product or a clean ingredient, something that comes from nature. Functional will mean something that adds um, either a health benefit or something that does something for their body, provides energy, digestion benefits, those kind of things. So, well, they may not put it in those terms exactly. I think they think of natural as something different than functional. So moving on, looking at more closely at the full ratings in the Americas, you'll see a bit more depth in the consumer view. So most of these whole grains are rated highly positively. That's that blue bar, or good. But where they aren't chosen as good, they're typically categorized as neutral by consumers. So the yellow, neither good nor bad. And what this typically symbolizes is a lack of focus on these grains. People either aren't terribly familiar with them, or they're simply not as focused on that level of detail in their dietary choices, so they don't really care. They don't really have a perception of positivity or negativity towards a specific grain. But this also provides a good opportunity, because in these grain ratings, there's not a significant negativity to overcome. The red is relatively small. Other categories have much bigger red bars, other more negative views that have to be overcome. So if your product includes millet, for example, the very bottom of the list that relatively few in comparison to the others are rating as good, the consumer just needs to be educated, because they're mostly neutral. People don't really either know what it is, or don't know whether it's good or bad, or don't necessarily care, or it's not part of their regular dietary choices. So they just need to be more educated, made more aware of what it is and how it can benefit them. And this will pull people over from the neutral to the more positive. So we've talked some about how consumers will prioritize whole grains, and then fiber often comes out above whole grains as a priority, both diet, labels, some of the other things we've covered here. But what's important to note is that while consumers want fiber, just adding fiber to a product is not necessarily the best option. In our list of good, bad, and neutral, we asked about added fiber, and you may not have seen it, it was further down on the list. And added fiber was rated as good by just 43%, well below the good ratings of all those other whole grains that we asked about, except for millet, which falls down at 32%. So don't get me wrong, people want fiber. It's been proven out by all of our research, but it's the source that's in question here. So if they can have fiber that comes from whole grains, a more natural source, a less processed source, that will be seen as beneficial to most people. So if you have a whole grain, just talking about it as a whole grain may not resonate with consumers as much as a claim that, let's say, talks about your product being high fiber from whole grains, or even better yet, high fiber from a specific whole grain like oats, which is rated very highly positive. So that'll satisfy their desire for both the high fiber element that they're looking for from a natural, less processed source that they're looking for. And that's even more important to consumers to satisfy all those buckets at once. Okay, so moving on to whole grain prioritizers. So hold on, I have one question. What kind of wheat are people thinking of when they're comparing wheat, whole wheat, white wheat? Um, we don't specify in our data, and I don't necessarily have the background knowledge to speak to that. So apologize, but I would imagine, if I'm speaking from my area of expertise, not from the data, that something that is whole or brown or wheat in general that doesn't have the white wheat is going to be perceived as better, healthier, more natural from a consumer perspective. So moving on to whole grain prioritizers. From early in our presentation, we saw what they were focusing on as dietary priorities, and one of them was adding whole grains, and that's what we're focusing on here. So this is the cut of our database by those who say that adding whole grains has become more important in their diet over the last year. So this is a very specific 32% of American consumers. Similarly, it's about 30% of those globally. And they index slightly older and slightly more female, but they're not dramatically different. It's largely a general demographic group. So to this group, the whole grain prioritizers are going to be in blue throughout this section. They are healthy foods are really the focus to them. So most consumers overall claim to eat healthy foods. That's the yellow bar. 71% say they always or usually eat healthy foods. Well, whole grain prioritizers are significantly more likely to do so, always or usually on a regular basis. But it's not just about prioritizing health. They really demand more from their foods, and we'll dig into that a bit more later. But taste still matters, but they're less likely to choose just for taste. So it's a boost in the healthy foods column. It's a little bit lower in the taste column. They don't need foods that only taste good. That doesn't mean they don't want foods that taste good. They definitely do, but they want more from their foods than just taste. Nutrition is what they're looking for. It's more critical at all times of day by about 10 points higher than the average consumer. So throughout the entire day, every snacking occasion and every meal time, nutrition is a higher priority. And whole grains means better nutrition to these consumers because, as we know, it defines this group. It's a dietary priority for 100% of this consumer group. So let's dig in a little bit more in their snacking habits. So even at snack times, they're prioritizing nutrition. They snack at about the same rate. That's on the left side. Those two bars are very similar in increased, same, or decreased use of snacks. But if we look on the right side, you'll see some differences. Whole grain prioritizers are much more likely to choose healthier snacks. 66% say that they do so, versus 53% of the overall population. This really provides a critical opportunity for the whole grain industry because those consumers are specifically seeking out better options and more whole grain. So what exactly are they looking for in snacks? Well, we know they're seeking whole grains in general, but it's not at the top of their list. Taste is still at the top of their list. It's still a critical factor. In fact, full 80% say that taste is extremely important or very important when choosing a snack. very much the same as overall Americans. And then looking down the full list of snacking attributes, you'll see whole grain prioritizers place more importance on nearly all better for you benefits. Well, food and beverage industry staples like taste and price even are similar in importance to consumers overall. So price actually drops to number 7, I believe, on the list here, but it's the same percentage. So they're equally likely to say it's important, but it falls within other better for you things. Lower sugar, lower salt, made with fruits and vegetables, higher fiber, natural, and even made with whole grains are all relatively similar in importance to price, whereas to consumers overall, price and taste are pretty discernibly at the top. Okay. So what motivates whole grain prioritizers? So they're more likely to be concerned about health issues. They're going to be more focused on their health overall. They eat healthier, they think about health more. But many of the specific health issues that whole grains can help with, like heart health, inflammation, and gut health issues, they're all more concerned about. And that concern translates into action for these consumers. So significantly higher portions of this group are making food and beverage choices to counteract those health concerns that they have. So this shows those that are making food and beverage choices for each of these benefits. So they're 12 points more likely to make food and beverage choices for heart health. They're 11 points more likely to make those choices for reducing risk of cancer. They're 10 points more likely to be always or usually choosing foods for improved digestion and gut health. So it's not just about telling consumers what's in their product or the ingredients they may want to see. It's telling them how those ingredients can benefit them. So whole grains for heart health and gut health resonate with these consumers. They're already actively making choices for these benefits. So adding that to the label, assuming that the claim is appropriate, is going to be beneficial for consumers. So let's focus on the gut health element for a moment. We just saw that 60% of whole grain prioritizers say they are making choices to improve their overall gut health, compared to 50% of total consumers. So how do they view gut health? Well, whole grain prioritizers see the benefits of a healthy gut well beyond digestion. So we see they relate it to physical health, weight, stress, energy, mood, and on and on. Whole grain prioritizers are just slightly more likely to make these connections. But it's really actually not dramatically different from the consumer overall. The order is a little bit different, but in reality, the total population also makes these connections. Where the difference lies is in the ingredients that they're seeking for these gut health benefits. Whole grain prioritizers are much more focused on health. They're more engaged with their product choices, their nutrition, the overall benefits from their foods and beverages. They engage with it more, they understand it more. So it's not surprising that they would show higher interest in ingredients that really create an overall better diet. They're most likely to look for fiber, whole grains, and probiotics specifically for gut health benefits, well above other ingredients. And as you'll recall, fiber isn't just about adding fiber, it's about getting it naturally, through which whole grains are a prime source. So whole grains really satisfies the top two things on this list. So we saw earlier that natural and clean were top priorities for consumers overall. And this is even more true for those that focus on whole grains. This group is simply more discerning about what they put in their bodies, and therefore they are paying more attention to all product attributes. So they're more what becomes more important to them is a natural product, an organic product, cleaner label, so fewer ingredients on the label. So it's a product that they can really feel good about. Is where they'll put their money where their mouth is. So one of the biggest trends in the food industry that we're seeing today is transparency. Consumers, and this goes along with the clean and natural aspects as well, and consumers really want to be engaged with the product and part of the product journey. So whole grain prioritizers are even bigger advocates of this trend, with nearly 2 in 3 who want total transparency. They want to understand how the product is made and the source of the ingredients. So ethically sourced is also important to well over half of these consumers. And then traceability, the idea that you can actually track ingredients or products back to their source, to even to a specific farm or farmer, helps create that connection to the consumer. And then in turn, it leads to greater levels of trust between you and your product and your consumer. And then I had a question, how do you define whole grain prioritizers? So this is the 32% that say that they have that adding whole grains has become more important in their diet over the last year. So they have to have decided that whole grains is a dietary priority for them. So all of these consumers with the blue bar have claimed that whole grains are a priority for them. So sustainability, particularly in an industry that relies heavily on agriculture, is also of high importance to those who are prioritizing whole grains. So these consumers are more likely to demand a higher environmental standard at all stages of the product journey. From the source, like supporting regenerative agriculture and soil health, to processing and demanding lower environmental impact from the product, all the way to the shelf with environmentally friendly packaging and other claims that they can actually see and hold that show up on the product package. And as you'll note, as the product gets closer to the consumer and closer to the shelf, the more important that factor becomes. It becomes more tangible to them. So in summary, most consumers look at whole grains as part of an overall healthy diet. It's not just a singular focus. Nothing is with consumers, but it is an important piece. And while high fiber tends to resonate with consumers, they don't just want added fiber, they want fiber from a natural source, and whole grains can really fill that gap. And then those who prioritize whole grains prioritize health. So looking for better nutrition and more benefits from the products they choose. And then getting to know your consumer goes well beyond just their diet. They want transparency in their products, and they're making sustainable choices for a better tomorrow. They're also looking for better nutrition and health. And then I have one. What is the age group of those polled? That's another question. It's 18 plus, so it's adults. I goes well into their 80s, but it varies a bit by country as well. If you want more detail, I can send that on. I can be reached through Kelly, probably is the best way to get in touch with me if you're looking for more details on the methodology. In general, this is the broad methodology, but it doesn't have the age groups included. Are there any other questions? Or hi, Kelly.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much. This was wonderful. So for everyone tuning in, we will send the recording and these slides to you, hopefully by the end of the week. And also we'll share this with our other Whole Grains Council member companies as well, or if you have colleagues who weren't able to tune in. It looks like we did get one more question about cost versus sustainability.
We definitely have questions on price and sustainability. I'd have to look if they're directly comparable to each other, like if we could really tell side by side, like if there's the same question format to see which one is the priority. But we definitely have a perspective on both within this group.
And when in our follow-up email, we'll include more information about how to reach HealthFocus International in case you have questions about this data set in particular, or how to learn more about this topic. So with that, I think our time has come to a close, but thank you everyone for tuning in, and thank you, Julie, so much for your time. And we look forward to seeing you all again soon.
Thank you.
All right, take care.